Telegraph Business of Sport conference is going to be a real opportunity for people to get together and hear from the real leaders in the game. All of them coming together in one place, it's absolutely unmissable.
I think the Telegraph Business of Sport conference is so timely because of the nature and the global changes that are beginning to appear in sport.
The sports industry as a whole is a very, very complex industry. Clearly it's changed a great deal over the last 20 or 30 years as we've gone into the digital world, as television broadcasting has changed.
It's always great to get together with other sports and with other people, whether it be business or whether it's sport.
The Telegraph has gathered together some of the best minds, some of the most interesting people, and I think bringing together in particular business alongside media, alongside sporting experts is going to create an absolutely fascinating debate.
So this is a great year for the Telegraph to be putting on a conference. The Telegraph Business of Sport 2015 makes a whole lot of sense on the global sporting calendar.
I have the great honour of welcoming people like Sebastian Coe, like Claire Balding, all sorts of people involved in the very top of sport.
Sport has changed dramatically. These are exciting, they're emerging markets. So I think that really is the big challenge out there. British sport, if it wants to access those markets, really has to be at the top of its game.
Sport is going through a huge transition at the moment. It's really on the cusp of immense technological change.
One of the things that we'll discuss at the conference is how you monetize social media, which is the holy grail for many media organisations.
All clubs, all stadia, all rights holders have to look at technology and see what it can deliver for them.
For us, it's about consolidating ourselves into the business in the way that we attempted to do when we launched, which was to build credibility very, very quickly, to be a responsible broadcaster in this industry, which we believe we've done, and to do it in our own fresh and entertaining way, which again I think we've managed to do. So we'll continue to pursue those objectives.
It gives the UK a great opportunity to showcase its technology prowess as well as its sporting prowess.
I think it's very much about matching brand and vision and purpose with commercial partners in a way that perhaps is deeper than has been done before to really enhance engagement with the sport.
I'm going to be really interested to hear how some of the contributors have raised the profile of women's sport.
The conference is going to be a fantastic opportunity to do that and to help us realise our ambition for the future.
I think this is a really great opportunity to bring the commercial world, the organisational world under one roof in one conference.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome sports columnist of the Daily Telegraph and chairman of the Business of Sport 2015, Jim White.
Good morning everyone and welcome to the Telegraph's Business of Sport conference, which is run in association with our principal partner BT Sport and sponsors Standard Life Investments, Supernaut and Populous. My name's Jim White and I'm going to be your host over the next couple of days. Apologies if you were hoping for my shouty namesake from Sky Sports. Unfortunately, he was otherwise detained yelling through Harry Redknapp's car window. So you've got me instead. But I get the feeling that the other Jim is really going to be missing out. Over the next couple of days, this is going to be the place to be. We have an incredible cast list of people who represent the very best of the sports business. We've got Lord Coe, Ian Ritchie, Lawrence Dallaglio, Claire Balding. We've got representatives of BBC, of BT Sport, of ITV, of UK Sport. We've got people from Man United, from Barcelona, from IMG and the UCI. And, ladies and gentlemen, we've got Robbie Savage. And it's not just on stage that we've got great minds. We've got great people out in the audience as well. And we really want you to get involved. It's very much your conference. There'll be plenty of opportunity to ask questions of keynote speakers and join in the panel discussions. Just stick your hand up to speak and someone will come to you with a microphone. The whole event's being recorded, so don't start your question until you've got the microphone in hand. Otherwise, your words will not be kept for posterity. If you could state your name and who you represent as well, that will help put it into context for the speaker. Couple of bits of housekeeping. Unusually, for a conference, I'm not asking you to turn off your mobile phone. You're all busy people. I know you need to be in touch. And also, you might wish to tweet, and please feel free to do so at any point. Anything you hear is tweetable. Use the hashtag TelegraphBOS. But if you could put your phone on silent, that would help the interruptions. There aren't any fire drills scheduled today, so if you hear a continuous alarm, you need to get out. Try and go through the doors which are marked with the green on top of them, and leave by the nearest exit and go to the assembly point, which is located at the BT Centre side of St Paul's Cathedral by the Chapter House and Café Paul. Don't worry, the instructions are given on the back cover of your conference book. When I first started out as a reporter, which was a lot longer ago than I'm prepared to admit in public, my hero was a chap called Frank Keating. He was a lovely man, warm, encouraging, with a beautiful prose style that was really worth emulating. And I remember him frequently referring to the sports pages of our newspaper as the toy department. It was kind of typically self-deprecating remark by Frank, but it also did point to a wider sense within newspapers that sport was reckoned a mere distraction, a laugh, maybe not something that adults should be wholly engaged with. Frank was talking a generation ago. Let's just say that no one would suggest such a thing now. Sports coverage in newspapers has grown exponentially over the past 2 decades. Our own coverage in the Telegraph spans dozens of pages every week. This morning, for instance, we have an exclusive from Kevin Peterson, which was all over the news at 10 last night. There is more coverage of sport in our newspapers than there is of the arts, than politics, foreign affairs, even business and finance. On television and radio too, sport is at the heart of the output. As we'll learn in this conference, it's central to the business model of many a broadcaster. In social media, as much as conventional forms, sport dominates the national conversation. And it's no real surprise that we take sport so seriously these days. You only have to look around us, and over the next few weeks, we'll be hosting here in this country events that are the envy of the world. We've got Wimbledon, the Ashes Tests, Henley, the Open at St Andrews, the Derby at Epsom, Glorious Goodwood, the Grand Prix at Silverstone. And that's without mentioning Premier League football, which has become this country's leading cultural export. Once we used to send cars, ships, locomotives around the world. Now we send Chelsea against Liverpool. Then in the autumn, we're going to see the Rugby World Cup here, which, as we'll be hearing today, promises to be the biggest, best organised and most watched edition in the tournament's history. Already, 2 million tickets have been sold to that event. Why is it going to be such a success? Well, because it's going to be hosted here in this country. Here we know how to deliver grand events. Here we have unrivaled crowds, unmatched enthusiasm, a peerless appetite for watching live sport. That's why organisations like the NFL, the NBA cast such covetous eyes on our market. That's why they organise events here on an annual basis. And as a result of that enthusiasm, we've got a sports business that is the most dynamic in the world. A business, moreover, as we'll be discovering over the next couple of days, that is hungry to develop, innovate and improve. And I think there's nobody who knows better the huge potential that sport has to showcase this country than our first speaker. For 2 weeks in the summer of 2012, I was privileged to report for the Daily Telegraph on the London Olympics. And privileged I really was. It was the best fortnight of my working life. I think all of us expected that the London Olympics were going to deliver outstanding athletic performance. What took many of us by surprise was the atmosphere that there was around that fortnight. It was 2 weeks of joy, 2 weeks of public enthusiasm, 2 weeks of the country coming together. And that didn't happen by chance. It happened by the most brilliant organisational verve. So please welcome to the stage the man who, with a genius unmatched in the history of staging live events, delivered without question the single most significant event of my lifetime. A man whose illustrious achievements require no repetition by me, although, like all of our speakers, there is a full biography in your conference book. Ladies and gentlemen, the architect of London 2012, Lord Coe.
Far too kind. Jim, can I firstly thank you, firstly for the invitation and secondly for the very warm words. It wasn't quite the long run for home that you portrayed a few moments ago. It was done with a few of my friends, and pleased to say that many of you are in this room today, both as partners during the bidding process and also during the delivery of the games. I'm delighted to be here for a number of reasons. First of all, I think this is a really seminal moment in the development of sport, particularly in the way sport is perceived in the UK and internationally, but also to be back in a building that we seem to spend most of our time in the lead up to the games, because BT, of course, were one of our really helpful and supportive partners, and one of those few partners that weren't only just our marketing partners, but also a large chunk of infrastructural provider. I'm also delighted to say that the Fourth Church has never been a broader, Fourth Estate's never been a broader church. I'm delighted to see Charlie LaSalle from the Daily Mail sitting up there, lurking in the alcoves. Let me welcome everybody to the Daily Telegraph Business of Sport Conference. I know, as Jim has already said, this will be and should be a fascinating few days. And I really do hope that our deliberations this morning and throughout the course of the next few days inspire new ideas and real creativity. And I also hope that as businesses and individuals, we can benefit sport at every level and around the world. Our various companies and organisations only exist because of sport, and it really should go without saying that we need to care for it and we need to try and grow it. If sport suffers, we all suffer. And yes, sport is now big business, but we must look after it for our businesses to thrive. I know I'm lucky. I have woken up most mornings for the largest part of my life knowing that sport in one way or another was going to shape my day. I was fortunate enough to compete at the highest level and have been involved in sport ever since. Bidding for and then leading a team that delivered the Olympic and Paralympic Games to London was an obvious high point. But it was a high point that needed to be put into context. And not just simply because we created a platform for the best athletes of their generation and the best athletes in the world to come together to showcase their God-given and, in most cases, their coach-honed talent, but because we got to spread the word about just what an extraordinary force for good sport can be, an unparalleled tool in health, entertainment, in business, in nation building, and of course personal development. I'm thrilled still to be involved in my capacity as Executive Chairman of Chime Sports Marketing and also as the Vice President of the International Athletics Federation. During my time in the sports business, and this must go for pretty much most of you sitting in this room, an awful lot has changed in the way that sport is consumed. This applies to spectators at large events as well as those watching from home. There is so much more choice, and as well as those watching, we now have a choice that is unparalleled on so many different platforms. And let me just digress for a moment. I hope that the preferences of the British taxpayer, now that we've got the general election out of the way and the BBC heads for its charter renewal, are respected and taken into consideration in terms of the way the BBC and terrestrial television now consume and want to bid for sport. the taxpayer does want to see sport, and they do want to see sport free and open to air. I believe that the trigger, though, for this sporting boom was the Los Angeles Games of 1984, my second Olympic Games. Now, there are many of you in this room that would probably be able to separately carbon date those big moments in sport that had the seismic impact and shaped the way sport is now consumed and viewed today. But I think 1984 in Los Angeles was a pretty seminal moment. Those games were not only a watershed for the Olympic movement, but in my opinion can genuinely lay claim to being the first games of the truly modern era. And if you don't entirely share my view, then few can surely argue that at the very least it was anything other than a game changer. After the financial, constructional and political challenges and fragilities, particularly the African boycott, in the Montreal Games of 1976, it's worth remembering that LA's bid to host the biggest show on earth started with only Tehran as a rival. A change of management a few months afterwards left LA as the sole bidder. It's almost unthinkable that so relatively recently the most sought-after gig in the sporting firmament could struggle to find anyone to throw their hat in the ring to stage it. And by the way, when LA did prevail, the city council tried to hand them back, so nervous were they. Now everybody is after a slice of the sporting action, which is how it should be. As I've said, sport is big business. One of the very best ways to showcase your country and attract new investors. And in the years since the Los Angeles Olympics showed a healthy profit by being professionally organised and breaking new commercial ground, the IOC's top sponsorship agreements found their genesis in the Los Angeles Games. The global appetite for sport has grown at its fastest rate since the end of the 19th century. And the reason is very simple. Sport is important to us, and it always has been. There are 10,000-year-old cave paintings in the Egyptian desert that depict people swimming, and 4,000 years before Christ, there were stick and ball games being played in what is now Mexico. TelegraphBOS of Ellis was a cook. Might not be a household name, but he should be. He was the first ever Olympic champion, winning a running race in 776 BC. Professor Alan Gutman, considered the world's foremost sports historians, talks of there being a single sports culture in ancient times that stretched from Roman Britain in the west to what is now the Middle East. Gutman believes that the first great transformation in sport took place over several centuries. The second transformation took place in the late 19th and 20th centuries, when modern team sports, such as the various codes of football and other ball games, were exported from Britain and America to the rest of the world, complete with the rules, bylaws, and other codifications. This process took decades rather than centuries, the speed emphasizing the changing nature of our world. We're now in the midst of the third great transformation, and it's happening all around us, and it's happening on every front. The pace of change has accelerated exponentially so that the future arrives almost immediately. Think about Red Bull. 1 minute it was the new edgy product, now it's very much a part of the sporting establishment. That's how fast things move. Mass media can attract billions of viewers to events such as the World Cup and the Olympic Games. But other events can now count on and tap into global audiences, the Champions League, Formula One, the Super Bowl, the Indian Premier League. If audiences are counted in billions, there is little wonder that brands, businesses and nations want to be a part of this, or to have at least a slice of the action. But with these opportunities come challenges, and the wider sports industry has to be prepared for them. This is the age of opportunity, so we can no longer be tied by old conventions and nostrums. We have to be strategic in what we do to grow our sport. We cannot shut the door to anything. Every sport, however niche, can benefit from what is now possible today and possible on every platform. It occurred to me when I was in Brazil for the World Cup last year that when the 2010 tournament kicked off in South America, the iPad was just a couple of months old. Apple have shifted more than 200 million tablets since then, and the second screen experience is now the norm. Twitter use has increased by a staggering 13,500% in just 4 years. There was more social media in the first few hours of the London Games than for the entirety of the Beijing Games, and the pace of development gets faster all the time. This applies to every facet of sport, and why those of us in the business of sport have to develop and adapt faster than ever before. Sports looking to expand may no longer crave the big TV deal. They might bypass television entirely. Not so long ago, a family shared a screen. Now an individual has the choice of several. My kids seem to have about 4 each. Anyone over the age of 30 can recall a time when, beyond international tournaments, the only live football match shown on television was the FA Cup final. Now, despite drowning in football, our appetite for the beautiful game knows no limits. Sports fans are now sports consumers, and our consumption habits have evolved accordingly. The most obvious sign of that evolution is that one screen is clearly no longer enough. Digital technology is the sports consumer's most loyal ally. Even the biggest stadiums on earth can contain only about 90,000 people, and they can share that experience live. And we are now obsessed by the big live communal event. But the vast majority of fans experience their sport through screens. The second screen is the screen that we can no longer do without. It's the screen that does the job of the first screen, what we used to call television. But the second screen is so much more. Whether a phone or a tablet, it's a tool by which we connect to the sports community. The second screen is now the primary screen. We can watch it, we can talk to it, we can listen to it, we can read it, we can write on it, have a bet on it, and buy tickets. And think about this. At the Sydney Olympics in 2000, ticketing was an entirely paper operation, where you used a coupon on the newspaper and then put a cheque in the post. And if the ticket wasn't available, the cheque was returned to you. That was only 15 years ago, but it seems almost medieval compared to what is possible today. The new world provides us with many opportunities, and those who can make the most of those opportunities will be the ones that survive, thrive, and ultimately win. But what we mustn't do is see opportunities as threats. Back in 2005, when London was bidding for the 2012 Olympic Games, the list of candidate cities was lustrous, but also pretty predictable. As well, of course, as London, it comprised Paris, Madrid, New York, and Moscow, all cities in sporting terms from the old world, all from countries that had staged summer games before. The 4 cities that didn't make it through to from the initial valuation were Rio de Janeiro, Istanbul, Havana, and Leipzig. London came through a vigorous and very competitive campaign by a margin of 4 votes in 104. I hope the most marginal election I'm ever likely to fight, particularly in August in Beijing. When you look around the new global landscape, certainly for the foreseeable future, London might actually be the last of the old cities to be awarded the Games for many years. And while Tokyo will host supremely well in 2020, it prevailed as much for reasons of safety and competence. But the Japanese capital was beaten by Rio to the 2016 Games and was run close by Istanbul in 2020, which were both cities that didn't make it past the initial evaluation and cut for 2012. It's clear that the sporting world is shifting. If I'd stood before you at a major congress any time in the last 20 years and said we'd have had a World Cup in Africa, an Olympic Games and a World Cup in South America, and then on to Qatar, that Baku would be staging the European Games this summer, and that the world of sport was heading to Kuala Lumpur in July to decide where the Winter Games was going to be hosted in 2021, and a choice between Almaty and Beijing, I think I'd have probably taken quite long odds for those of you who were punters. And this is because at any of these congresses that I've attended in the past 30 or so years, we've all corralled behind the same cliches. We've talked of encouraging young people to take up sport, to globalise sport, and to take sport to places where it can make a difference, to create social and political bridgeheads. We've encouraged cities such as Rio to host the Olympic Games, Qatar to host the World Cup, and Baku to use sport to show that it is very much a part of Europe. We've also rightly welcomed the confidence in Africa to pitch for the World Cup and hopefully a World Athletics Championships, even an Olympic Games. So the mantra, to a certain extent, must have paid off. But are we really comfortable with that? Well, we need to be. And we need to embrace it because the world has shifted mainly to the east and with its sport. And as the gap between the haves and have-nots has closed, there are countries in the world that are now rich in all sorts of things and not just commodities. And with their newfound wealth, they want to play in the big league. And for perfectly legitimate reasons, they have the right to. They often want to do so to shift our perceptions, and by doing it through sport, they can achieve it far quicker than in ways that might have otherwise taken decades. We shouldn't sniff at this, because here there is nothing new. Plenty of countries have done so in the past. I could make a strong case for this use of sport in almost every host city of an Olympic Games since 1896. Some have done so less benignly than others, such as Berlin in 1936, but all have used it to showcase a diverse range of national themes. The old Eastern Bloc of my competitive career, and East Germany in particular, had clear intent. They wanted to show that through domination of female sport, they could move the dial quicker than they could in any other way. The Soviet Union was the same. If most people closed their eyes in the 1960s and 70s and thought about Russia and what it meant, they probably conjured up images of competent football teams, stacks of Olympic medals, great gymnasts and superb sprinters. As far as they were concerned, it was job done. But they were not alone. Japan knew that hosting the Tokyo Games in 1964 would help ease them back into the international fold. The same, to a certain extent, could be said of the World Cup in '72 and the Games of '74 in Munich. If it is the most potent of social workers, sport is also the deftest of soft powers, the consummate international diplomat. So now we come to the next stage of the sporting journey, and here the path is not at all well defined. What we do know is change has begun. It's coming with growth and it's coming with rapidity. And we know we need to be prepared to embrace and shape it. The mantra of sport for all has played, but there is a slight sniffiness, an insouciance, a nervousness that these emerging nations have developed an appetite for sport. It isn't going to go away, so we'd better get used to it and devise strategies that makes the very most from it. These countries all have the wherewithal and feel they have been encouraged to go out and bid for the world's biggest and best sporting events. The old argument that they might have the money but don't have the skill sets just doesn't hold anymore. If you've got the money to create the infrastructure, then you have the money to buy in the operational integration and talent to deliver it. The question is, how are we going to react to the new direction that the sporting world is taking? No longer can we simply mouth the mantras of building global capacity, impacting and imprinting sporting values on millions of young people around the world. Of course, there are going to be political and cultural differences in countries that bid for the big events, and we have to be mindful that the decisions that we make do have social and political ramifications. But we can no longer say in the same breath, sorry, old boy, we all come from comfortable political structures, liberal democracies, or whatever that means, and we're not sure about your record on human rights. And by the way, it's far too hot in July. We can't encourage them to invest in sport, enshrine it as a part of their educative, social, cultural wiring, and then stumble on or construct barriers of entry when they do avail themselves of those catalytic drivers that often come from hosting the party themselves. We're going to have to find the navigable path, and yes, sometimes it will be boulder-strewn. And it will mean beginning a global conversation that covers political, cultural, and economic differences, even a rethink of the traditional sporting calendar. We can no longer sit here and say that new formats and championships in emerging sporting powers can only be held at certain times of the year for fear of clashing with major or more established leagues and climatic inhibitors. And if we're unwilling to have this conversation, I fear that many of these countries that have an appetite to invest in sporting infrastructure, both hard and soft, will find other priorities for their tax take and sovereign funds. Or of equal danger, metaphorically, sticking two fingers up to the sporting establishment, going it alone, and leaving in their wake international federations and other governances that have served us well. Witness the revolutionary change in cricket in the 70s, led by Kerry Packer, and born in large part by the intransigent clinging to the status quo. Casting a Nelsonian eye to the appetite for change in sport will ultimately serve us badly. There are now a host of relatively new nations with a stan as a suffix to their names, and they will all want to be involved in the business of sport. And we can't keep logging on to TripAdvisor, seeing that they do things a bit differently from us, and the nightlife is not what we're used to, and then deciding it might not be such a good idea to go there after all. The whole world of sport wants to be a part, and we recognise and we need to accept it. Sport is something that everyone can do and be a part of wherever they live, whatever they do, whatever they believe. It's an inclusive and unifying force. Our mission must be to ensure no one is left out. Sport provides values and virtues for young people. It has an overwhelmingly positive effect on society. Sport has been at the heart of the fight against discrimination. It flashes a spotlight on issues that politicians often leave untouched and don't get within a country mile of. In the past 30 years, sport has stood front and centre in promoting equality and diversity. Women now compete in all Olympic sports and disciplines. Athletes with disability and impairment have a games and a profile that was unimaginable 20 years ago. Sport is the global entertainer. The best leagues are broadcast around the world, and the biggest events are tailored to attract the largest audiences. But ultimately, sport comes alive on the pitch, the track, or in the pool. Its values and appeal are timeless. It would not have survived for 3 weeks, let alone 33 centuries, were it not for those virtues. Our duty is to leverage those virtues for everyone. Thank you. Do you want me to stay here? Or
You stay there.
No.
Thank you very much indeed for those words. Look, I'm not going to let you go. There's questions
I didn't think
from the audience. If you've got a question, put your hand up. We've got microphones coming around. Please just state where you're from so that we know and who you are. So yeah, we'll start, gentleman there with the yellow lanyard in front of, on the front row.
Thanks very much. It's Callum Murray
Callum.
from SportCal. Hi, Seb. Very professionally, you haven't mentioned your campaign for the IAAF presidency. So
I did. There was just a little throwaway.
Right. Well, I'll give you
about marginal elections.
I'll give you a little bit more of an opportunity. What, in your view, how can athletics and indeed every other sport compete with the juggernaut that is football and in general and the Premier League in particular?
It's a good question, and it's the question that most sports confront on a daily basis. Interestingly, of course, when I started to sort of nudge my way into the British track and field team, we'd come out of a hopeless 1976 Games. I think Brendan Foster was the only medalist we had on the track that year. I mean, that was almost unthinkable. And the team that sort of, I guess, ushered us into what has become generally considered to be the golden generation of British athletics was, you know, the Daley Thompsons, the Steve Ovetts, the Steve Crams. And to put that into perspective, when Brendan Foster was organising the track meet up in Gateshead, Newcastle United, at the beginning of the season, used to get in touch with him and ask him whether he would be putting the Gateshead International event on a Friday night or a Saturday afternoon, And if it was the Saturday afternoon, they'd move their match to the Friday night because more people wanted to watch track and field than be in St James's Park. That has, well, that's actually probably the case now, but it's just to put it into perspective. And you know, I'm passionate about football and have a well-documented involvement with Chelsea, but I think we can safely say that track and field were the beneficiaries in the late 70s and early 80s of football, which was a product that was pretty sullied at that time. We'd had our bans from Europe. We'd had an England team that hadn't qualified, I think, 2 or 3 times for a World Cup. And you know, you've got the violence and all the other stuff that went with it. So we sort of snuck through, and there was a generation that I think sports viewers in the UK suddenly saw, you know, the Ovets and the Thompsons not just winning on television, but they were actually winning world championships, and that saw us very well. Football is an entirely changed product from what it was 20 or 30 years ago. Our big challenge now is to deliver the sport in a less centralised way, and we can't go on delivering it the way we did 20 or 30 years ago. It's a sport of 213 federations. It's a sport with such a bandwidth of cultural and economic challenge. I was in the Caribbean just a few weeks ago where, you know, the president of one of the islands there is paying for pots of paint out of her own disposable income to mark the white lines on a grass track, and she lives in fear that cricket will even remove that facility from them. And yet you've got the powerhouse of track and field in the US, where athletes, top US athletes, couldn't walk down the Bahnhofstrasse in Zurich without giving autographs, but can walk around their own cities in anonymity. So we have some big challenges, and I think the first one is to reconnect the sport with young people. And with the best will in the world, we haven't done that in the last few years, and that's in large part the way we've presented it. I think it's become rather sclerotic. I think it's very predictable. I sat at the European Championships in Zurich a few weeks ago with a row of sponsors behind me who had clearly never been to the sport before, from about 10 different countries. And I sort of got chatting to one or two of them, and after about half an hour I asked them a very blunt question. I said, is there anything you watched in the last half an hour that you've remotely understood? And they sort of looked at me and said, well, not really. So I think we need to readdress how we deliver the sport, both globally. We've got to be much more attuned to the way it's being delivered at a local level. We can't be we have to be more flexible. I've come back from the World Relay Championships. You know, if children are appearing out of the birthing channel with batons in their hands, then let the sport develop where it's really strong. If women's marathon in Tokyo is a quasi-religious experience, let it develop in that way. We can't keep asking federations to deliver 47 different disciplines. And we've got to take it out of the stadium. We've got to take it into streets in the way that we witnessed this weekend in Manchester. So I think there's a lot we can do, and we shouldn't keep benchmarking ourselves against football. In fact, one of the things that we should be looking at is selling the concept of athleticism rather than simply athletics to kids that are 11 or 12. I think the world has changed. I don't think you're going to turn 11-year-olds or 12-year-olds into passionate javelin throwers. I think you have to get there by team events. I think you have to get there in a much more creative way. And I think all those things can happen, and I think they can happen quite quickly. But this is not 6 weeks to thin thighs. We do have some distance to catch up now.
Any more questions? Yeah, gentleman there.
Hi, Seb. Ben Rumsby from The Telegraph. You're involved in one of the 2 big presidential elections that we're going to see this year. Just wondering what your take is on the other candidates in the FIFA election being prevented from presenting their manifestos at various congresses, and how you would react as a candidate in a presidential election if you were sort of gagged in the same way that's happened to those candidates.
I'm not. Listen, I don't benchmark my sport against football, and I'm certainly not benchmarking the election. I put my manifesto out. I threw my hat in the ring in November. I put my manifesto out there in December, and I think you should be judged by, you know, your vision and your ideas. It's, you know, as Clinton once said, all elections are a referendum on the future. And I think, you know, the reason I've been in 4 continents in the last 2 weeks is exactly that. You know, you have to be able to articulate and identify what you think those challenges are for your sport, and that, you know, there's no point in throwing your hat in the ring to be the president of an organisation if after, you know, 1 or 2 terms you haven't made a significant and profound impact on that sport. But it does have to start with a proposition, and that proposition, you know, at its most basic, should appear in a manifesto. So I would always encourage anybody that's standing for office to be able to do so, and to be able to articulate properly what it is and why they want the role and the responsibility.
Any more questions? Yeah, gentleman at the back. Right at the back, at the top there, yeah, next to the camera.
Hi, Loco. This is a question on behalf of Tom Williams, who's a disability consultant who's sitting beside me. Tom benefited greatly from the positive discrimination used in 2012 regarding disabled people applying to be games makers, and in a sense that changed his life. How do you envisage future Olympic bidding cities extending on the positive discrimination used in terms of disabled volunteers?
I'm absolutely unreconstructed on this subject. I had probably the most talented team that have ever come together to, you know, to deliver a national project. I was very, very clear that I wanted that team at every level, and we ended up with 8,500 people in our organising committee, and that reflected the world that I lived in. And whether that was making sure that 25% of the organising committee came from the 6 host boroughs, and we really genuinely did, and we broke that glass ceiling in East London, or making sure that we had people in meaningful positions in the organisation with disability and impairment, and whether they were reflected in the games makers, this was really important. And I guess, you know, from my own background, you know, I was born in London, I was brought up in Yorkshire, I was educated in the East Midlands, I represented a Cornish constituency, and my mother's Indian. So I don't tend to see the world from the wrong end of a telescope, from within the M25. So it was not a nice to have, it was absolutely an essential balance in the organisation, that you were as diverse as you possibly could. It made us a better organisation. I'm actually genuinely proud that we had more women in positions of seniority, and I've got Chris Townsend sitting up there. He'd agree with me. There were more female directors. We were the first Olympic Games to appoint a female director of sport. First Olympic Games to appoint a female director of communications, of strategy and management planning. Our legal counsel was a woman. So you have to be, you know, I really am a believer in affirmative action. I think it's very easy for organisations to sit there and think it's going to happen because you wish it to happen. So your specific question relates to the role that disability played in the Games. I think it was the game changer. I don't think the UK will ever see disability, particularly in the workplace, in the same light again. I really hope that future Games enshrine the way we lifted the bar, and we did. You know, Beijing made a massive difference to Paralympic sport, but I do think that our teams in London, we were the first integrated organisation. You know, we weren't 2 separate organisations. I chaired both the Olympic and Paralympic organising committee. We had the first director of Paralympic integration. And for me, it's absolutely vital. So it is important that winter and summer games and big sporting events don't retrench, they don't go backwards, that they really do build on what we created in London, because I think it went way, way beyond I think it went way beyond just the sort of the cosmetic frontage. You know, we got deep into communities, and I think we gave people a belief that, you know, your organisation is actually a much better organisation for having that diversity.
You hope that? Do you know it? Do you
I
know
do
if
know
Rio are
it.
going to do
Yes,
it?
I do know it. If you look at any of the market research that has been followed up after the games, I mean, there are some interesting. The legacies are strong. You know, whatever is written about there's no legacy, it's absolute nonsense. You know, we've had about 16 or 17 billion that's gone into the British economy directly from legacy. We've had a 6% increase in volunteering. We've got 1.5 million people, particularly young people, playing sport that weren't playing sport in 2005. And one of the biggest shifts on the dial is the public response to what they saw in the Paralympic Games and the impact that the Paralympic Games have had. And I can give it you statistically, I can give it you anecdotally. I was at a dinner not long ago where a woman came up to me and has become a school governor at a big state school up in the north of England. And she said before the Paralympic Games, that board of governors never ever thought about accessibility in the school or how to integrate young people with disability and impairment into everyday sport. And she said now it's a big part of the school. She said it wasn't even remotely on the radar screen before the game. So all the time I've seen this. If you talk to the CBI, you talk to the Institute of Directors, you talk to all the employer federations, they had an absolute swell of people wanting to sign up to courses and programs that gave them a better understanding of some of the challenges of getting people with disability into the workplace. That would never have happened had the Paralympic Games not come to the UK.
Oh, one last question. Anyone out there? Just one thing. Oh, sorry. Yeah, gentleman at the back.
Thanks. Hi, it's Charlie Marshall from Supernor. You mentioned the shift from a kind of audience and consumption point of view away from the TV screen and onto the sort of multiplicity of devices that now inhabit our life. And you sort of gave a veiled reference to sport changing its business model, perhaps relying less on the money that has traditionally come in from TV for that kind of main TV product. I just wondered if you could expand a bit on that, and specifically on that point of how can certain sports break that reliance on the kind of the drug of TV money and still prosper and grow audiences.
I'll give you a very specific example of that, and it's no hidden secret. We have found it very, very difficult to create a marketplace for track and field in the US, and that's an odd. There's a perversity there. It's the point I often make, and I think I did in my remarks earlier, that the powerhouse of track and field has consistently been the US. Sometimes Jamaica has had the ascendancy in the sprints. But if you look at the strength in depth, you look at across various disciplines, you look at Olympic performances, you have to say that's been the powerhouse. And yet their top athletes can, as I said, walk in relative anonymity through their own neighbourhoods without people recognising them. When we tried to get the World Athletics Championships into the US in the early 2000s, we thought the interim step would be to get them to Canada in Edmonton. Actually, it didn't do what we wanted it to do. And since then, finding space on American television for track and field, and people tend to forget, no American audience since 1996 has seen an Olympic 100-metre final live. They have always been, hours later. So we looked at this afresh and we decided, look, all right, the NBCs, the ABCs are not going to take a World Athletics Championships over 9 or 10 days, certainly not domestically. We need to look at reformatting the event. But we then took a lot of those individual events, a lot of the individual track meets, including Diamond League, into streaming, into local local broadcasters who actually didn't put them through television, put them through any number of platforms. And we've now got it to the point where we've built up that interest again. And as you probably saw the other day, we've now finally managed to get the World Track and Field Championships into Eugene in 2021 by slightly bucking the bidding process. So that is the way you do it, and you can do it at a local level, and you can do it with social media partners, and you can do it, and streaming for us has been really important. Most people in the States have seen the last 2 World Championships, not through NBC or through broadcast, but actually through, you know, computer, iPad, laptops, the usual construct now. And I think there is a real scope here for smaller sports to be able to grab those niche markets, but you do have to form those partnerships. And one of the things I want to do, and you know, to slightly get back to the campaign, one of the things we have to do is to find a social media partner that can help sit alongside our sport and create those opportunities, particularly in the marketplaces where television is not a particularly strong provider for track and field. And I think that's a model that can actually work for many other sports. Now, okay, track and field is still a very powerful, potent sport in most of those markets, but if you look at the way we've created some of those opportunities in Africa, it's actually not been through television. And I think there is a template there for other sports. But it means creating partnerships, and it means making sure that those partnerships are really robust and strong, and they can help you shape the proposition to the marketplace, and it will be done effectively through digital and social.
Ladies and gentlemen, Lord Coe is in the midst of a far more important election than anything that's been going on in this country for the head of the IAAF. We've got to let him go off and campaign. Please put your hands together for Lord Coe. Thank you very much indeed for that. Thank you. Terrific. Wonderful. Thanks very much. I'm going to be mentioning these quite a lot during the course of the day. Can I draw your attention to the little piece of blue paper to your side, which is a feedback form? It's easier if you kind of fill it in as you're going on rather than leave it to the end. And it does make a big difference to the organisers to know how you were digesting and enjoying and consuming this conference. Our next speaker is a man who is tasked in many ways with following that. It's Ian Ritchie, the CEO of the Rugby Football Union, and the man who is responsible for the Rugby World Cup on our shores, which is happening from September. So, ladies and gentlemen, Ian Ritchie.
Thank you, Jim. Morning, everybody. An interesting task to follow, Seb, not only in terms of speaking, but also in terms of delivery. So we hope we can try and emulate every way around. First thing I think I wanted to say was that without hyperbole, 2015 for rugby in England is going to be the most important year since we were founded in 1871. Things have moved on a lot since 1871, although we were talking about change earlier. It wasn't that long ago that the telephone number of the RFU was ex-directory. So we've certainly improved a bit since then. But how have we improved as well in terms of the Rugby World Cup since it started? And just a few facts and figures about the one that's coming up. It is, by every definition, my usual line is that the marketing department tell me so it must be true. It's the third biggest sporting event in the world after the Olympics and the Football World Cup. We're looking at probably towards 500,000 international visitors. We're looking at 11 host cities, 13 venues, 41 team bases, and a 2.2 billion economic impact into the UK. And it's over 6 weeks, 48 matches, 20 teams. We are absolutely delighted to be the host of it. And I think so far as well, we're already looking at, we have already sold 2 million tickets. And just to give you an idea of the interest, one match at Twickenham attracted 650,000 applications for tickets. One match in Brighton attracted nearly 250,000 applications for tickets. So the demand has been fantastic. So we're delighted at the way the event is going. But the scale of it, I think, is important. It is a seminal moment for rugby. I think without question, on the numbers that you're sort of looking at there, this will be the biggest Rugby World Cup ever. One of our tasks is obviously to make sure that it's the best as well. And what have we got in terms of our objectives for the RFU? And really they're threefold, and they're all interlinked. And I think with most sporting organisations, all objectives should be interlinked. So we want the most inspiring tournament ever. And I think inspiration is something I'll come and talk about as well. The economics are important, and of course you want it to be an economic success. But what you want it to be most of all is a fantastic event where people have memories, where people remember those moments in the same way as many people remember Johnny Wilkinson's drop goal in 2003. And we want it to be that inspirational event, and how does that work? I see it's not inspiring as well, hopefully it's more inspiring. What we also want is that it's going to be a successful England team. We maybe talk about that a little bit later on. Will we win? What's going to be a success? How is it going to be? Well, all I can say to you is we are working our hardest to make sure that we're in the best possible place, because clearly a successful England team will be an important matter to delivering some of our objectives. But the final one is really, and bear in mind this is a single sport event, and therefore we've had certain opportunities hopefully to plan for this, is that there'll be a lasting legacy for the game as far as this country and indeed around the world is concerned. And so there will be three major things we're looking at. A domestic legacy, which is a matter primarily for the RFU, which I'll come back to. An international legacy, which is for the International Rugby Board, World Rugby to deal with, how they then invest the money from the World Cup to grow rugby around the world. But most important at the end of the day, I think it comes back to two things. What are you prepared to invest in time, people, resources, money? And what are we going to measure our success by? And I'm going to come back to that a little bit later on. None of this is sort of divorced from an RFU strategy and plan. And in 2012, we had a strategic plan that we brought together that encompassed the World Cup. And those are the 5 objectives that we set ourselves. We wanted the RFU to be a modern brand, having beaten that, having gone directory and having had digital activation of contact with the RFU. We're looking for increased revenue, because every bit of revenue that comes into the RFU goes back into the game. We invest everything back into the game. We want rugby for everyone. We want it to be inclusive. The women win the World Cup last year was a fantastic boost, I think, for women's rugby. But we want rugby to be inclusive, and that's one of the general themes I'll come back to. Of course we want to be successful. The women win the World Cup. Our junior team won the Junior World Cup the last 2 years running. So do we have a pathway for sustained and continued success? And finally, as I said, obviously in this period, a most inspiring Rugby World Cup. But just one figure to mention, and we're already going to exceed this. We wanted over the period of this plan to be able to invest over £1/3 billion back into rugby, whether that be the community game in the clubs or whether it be the professional clubs, which are so important as well. So what did we look at? So we started to plan our Lead Up and Legacy campaign in 2012. We budgeted for it in 2012. We have budgeted for it in the last 2 or 3 years. And therefore, we've made sure that we have an investment plan and a plan to work with partners. I think nearly all of us recognise that what you need to do most to get, frankly, the biggest bang for your buck and the engagement is to have a deal with partners to help you build these Lead Up and Legacy campaigns. So for us, O2, QBE, NatWest, Canterbury, CBRE have all been key partners in investing in the last 3 years as to what we're actually doing. We decided as well that we'd have 7 strands that were important for us. What were the 7 things we wanted to try and achieve around that legacy campaign? We wanted better facilities. I'll come back to that. This is clubhouses, communities, all of those types of things. We needed to invest in people. As far as rugby's concerned, you can't do anything unless you've got referees and coaches. So we've trained 20,000 more coaches, 7,500 more referees. We had 35,000 coaches on courses last year, which was about 50% up on where we were. And QBE have helped us with recruiting a further 2,015 coaches. We've done a plan that looks at keep your boots on. In other words, if you're a player, heaven forbid, that's coming up to retirement, what do you then want to do to help the game after that? And at the other end of the spectrum, we've appointed 1,000 young rugby ambassadors around the country to make sure that we're connected with youngsters. More schools. I'll come back to that a little bit in a minute. And when you also look at the other 4 strands, returning players, 16 to 24-year-olds, big difficulty for team sports and certainly for rugby of trying to get those people who maybe play up to about 16 or 18, and we want them to come back. Touch rugby is an important aspect of an alternative product we need to deal with. How do we relate with other nations? I'll come back to as well. And very important too, around the country to have a cultural engagement. With regard to facilities, what we're really talking about is we've invested directly £10 million, but that has resulted in a further £35 million going into facility upgrades in clubs. My usual line has been to say that what you want to find is a club facility that is not full of elderly men dribbling in a corner, drinking their beer, when somebody either young or female comes into the clubhouse is not exactly a welcoming atmosphere. What we need to do is transform rugby clubs, and the club at the bottom there, Breedon Star, which is in Gloucester, was changing in a horse box in 1991 and has built that facility from scratch in the last couple of years and raised money to deal with it. So what we've got now is 500 clubs benefiting from improved facilities to get people to play. What we've also looked at is improving those facilities. So in June 27th, we have a weekend where we'll have 16,000 volunteers in 400 clubs receiving grants, making sure that their facilities are improved and activated in collaboration with NatWest. Schools. This is, I suppose, our most important, I think, flagship programme. What we're trying to do is get rugby into state schools that have never played rugby before. And what we've done is to make sure that those schools now have an opportunity to play rugby. We've got 400 in place now. We want to get to 750 by 2019. And I was at Chorlton in Manchester last week at Loretto, and to see the impact of rugby and exercise on those children has been phenomenal. People who have perhaps been difficult, who have not been engaged at school, now have a situation where they feel that they have an outlet for being physical, an outlet for playing the game, and it's been transforming across the piece. If you talk to various school headmasters, they will say to you that they have adopted the values of rugby as the values of the school. My particular favourite story was one girl who was from a Muslim background who said her parents were very much against her playing rugby. And what happened was they went to the imam at the mosque who said, I think it's a good thing, you should do it. And we then got a large number of girls and boys coming to play rugby. So introducing the sport to people who've not been involved. And the All Schools campaign is our flagship programme. With that, Prince Harry is the patron, and we've invested and already raised a further £5 million to fund that, where we put the coaches in and Canterbury designed the kit for us. And it's quite an interesting example of detail that when you go to the school and say, you will design your own kit, what do you want? And even that meeting where they first all design their own kit, and then they get it delivered back to them, is really an important bonding moment in many ways. Touch is one of those things with sevens. I think we all have to look at different products that will work. And touch is one, again, that works for us against men and women in universities. And one of our targets is undoubtedly to engage more in terms of across that area of activation. Tournament activation is very important as well, and just 2 or 3 very swift examples. What we're looking at is partner campaigns. One of the things that Stuart Lancaster and I have spoke about a lot is how do you galvanise support around the country for the team? I think we all saw that at the Olympics in 2012. We want to make sure, of course we're slightly biased, that it's England that people are supporting. And therefore what we're looking at is various campaigns with BMW to get millions of people singing Swing Low, Sweet Chariot, and with O2 around the Wear the Rose campaign. What we believe will give us a significant advantage in winning and hopefully winning, is that we have that support in the stadium and around the country. And believe me, I know it has a huge impact on the players and really does work extremely well. But what we also do is galvanise a nation to get involved in the sport, get involved in the game. And at the other end, on a national campaign, what we've got is a festival of rugby that will run from June through to the end of the tournament. And this is about clubs and organisations running local events around that. So what we want to do is to make sure locally that people have a World Cup event. Doesn't matter what it is, we'll help organise it, we'll help set a template for doing this, and we've had 3,500 expressions of interest from clubs around the country who want to then do something connected with Rugby World Cup. Just to talk a little bit about, again, during the tournament itself, I think the situation is that there'll be 15 fan zones. We're hoping about 1 million people will come to the fan zones. One, for example, will be in Trafalgar Square. There's been a nationwide trophy tour that will start on June the 10th and will last for 100 days and will visit a whole raft of areas. And again, some of the Festival of Rugby things will come off that. We want to see community outreach with the team. And we want to see volunteers being active in that as well. We've got 6,000 volunteers. We've got a big session with them at Milton Keynes this weekend to get them into the right attitude and the right approach. Many of the people, in fact, who run the volunteer scheme that Seb was talking about are running the ones for us as well. So we think that there's going to be a great amount of rugby activation around the country as part of that. Two other things not to forget. As far as the flagship programme is concerned, we think that we want to make sure that there's social responsibility as well, and that this is bringing together all the charities that work in rugby so that they feel there is a common good and making sure that we make the most of that. So Lawrence's Foundation, the Injured Players Foundation, Restart, and various other things, including Wooden Spoon. So we will make sure that from a charitable point of view, we take opportunities around that. As well, we not missed out on the international. I said earlier that it was World Rugby's responsibility primarily, but we think we have a responsibility too. So we have set up a unity programme with 17 countries, primarily in Europe, and linking those in on a twinning concept to constituent bodies. And so therefore there's been a lot of visits backwards and forwards with Georgia, with Portugal, with Spain, people coming backwards and forwards. And it's been very interesting from our point of view as well, because relatively speaking, we're reasonably well funded, but to understand how Portugal run their rugby on a fraction of our budget and their fascinating ideas as to how to do it is a very interesting one. So it's a two-way project, and one of the seminal things we've done under the Unity project is have a women's under-18 development group where countries have come and held a workshop to discuss what they're doing and approaching that. There's been an international trophy tour which went around 15 countries, which has just finished in France, which again, going back to the 500,000 or so overseas visitors coming, what we want to do is promote the game and deal with it. So what are we going to deal with in terms of measures and targets, and how specific are they? Talked earlier, I think there will be a significant economic impact of the order of the 2.2 billion. We are supporting a significant number of jobs in England and in Wales with the 41,000. There will be a number of international visitors that I think will be fantastic. And again, on the economics, we're looking at a probably 4 billion plus TV audience, and we're looking at a ticket sales revenue that will certainly be in excess of 250 million. So I think it is fair to say on those terms, it will be the most successful ever. Most importantly, and I really do want to stress this is about being a great host. What we want to be is a great host to everybody that comes to watch rugby, to make sure that they have a fantastic time and enjoy it and go away with those sort of memories. Finally, for us within the RFU, we've got very specific targets. What do we really want? More people playing rugby. So we want to see, after the World Cup, 215,000 adult players on a regular basis. We want 750 new schools being involved in rugby. We want to see 15,000 people playing touch. We want to make a commitment to the facility investment, and we want to see an additional 20,000 qualified coaches and referees coming into the system. These are very precise, very clear, and they're objectives that we certainly think we can achieve. And as I said earlier, we've been planning for them for the last 3 years. So finally, just in summary, where are we? 3 clear objectives for the RFU. Part of our strategic plan, the direction of travel that we're in, the fact that all the money that we get comes back into the game and we invest in it. The 7 legacy strands, which are clear. We obviously have executives dealing with this. We also have regional legacy boards across each of the parts of the country, making sure that these are developed. A committed investment plan, which I think will result in those advantages that we came for, and clear accountability for the targets, having made those very clear as well. I think we have no doubt that it will be a fantastic event, and I hope that you all enjoy it, and I hope all your friends and neighbours get involved in it, because that's what we want. What we really want is to galvanise the nation around this, and I think for us, for rugby, it is one of those opportunities that we really do need to seize the opportunity, and I believe that we will. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much, Ian. I said at the beginning that there'd be an opportunity to question keynote speakers immediately after they've spoken. I'm going to row straight back on that. Never trust a journalist. Anything he says is usually wrong. Ian is going to join our next panel, so it makes sense that if you've got any questions for him, you ask them at the audience participation bit at the end of the panel. And the panel is exploring how hosting the Rugby World Cup will benefit UK and European countries. And Ian is going to be joined on stage by my colleague Mick Cleary, who is the doyen, which I think just means old, the doyen of rugby correspondence. And also, as moderator, we're delighted to have a Rugby World Cup winner, a man who played every single moment of England's matches in 2003. The most dynamic forward of his generation, and now carving a new career as a brilliant rugby pundit on BT Sport, Lawrence Dallaglio. So please welcome on stage Mick and Lawrence.
Good morning, everyone. I think thanks, Ian, for a wonderful presentation there. It was. I think I'd like to, for the next half an hour or so, we'll talk a little. We'll give Ian a little rest because he had to rush through that quite quickly, and I'll turn my attention to Mick. But I would ask you just to think about the questions that you'd like to ask any of us on the panel, because obviously this is the first of hopefully some inspiring and interesting panel debates over the next couple of days. I think it's very fitting that we are in the year of rugby, that Rugby World Cup kicks off that those conversations. Clearly Ian has been through and highlighted the economic benefits and the impact that it's going to have. 4 billion viewers worldwide, third biggest sporting event in the country. And I think the legacy of 2012, and listening to Seb, was that the appetite and anticipation and real desire to host big sporting events in this country has really been inspired by 2012. And I think what's absolutely game-changing, as Ian says, for rugby is that for a sport that's perhaps been pigeonholed over the years into slightly elitist, it really is changing and becoming a very different sport entirely. I think for me, the biggest World Cup, selling 2.5 to 2.3 million tickets. I was lucky enough to be in New Zealand 4 years ago, and that was, just to put in perspective, was 1.3 million tickets. So, significantly more people to host games in all the major cities, which are traditional hotbeds of football, is also very interesting, because let's be honest, there's a lot of rugby fans out there who all want to go and watch Rugby World Cup and have all bought tickets to the event itself. But really what this tournament does is reach out to people, to a much wider audience across the country, across all ages, that really will be watching rugby for the very first time. So Mick, as someone who's covered and followed the game for a long time, this is the 8th Rugby World Cup. I mean, it truly, you've seen in a period of time the way that the sport has changed, and how significant that is, and I guess how excited the whole country is getting about this particular tournament.
And it certainly seems as if Ian's team will be well organised, better organised. I remember in 1999, the last time it was held in these islands, the eve of the opening game in Cardiff, Leo Williams, chairman of the International Rugby Board, standing up and declaring, as Ian has just declared very stridently, that yes, everything is ready. And at that moment, a lump of plaster from the Millennium Stadium, which has only just been built, fell on his head. So that was a very seat of the pants kind of operation back then in 1999. There was no build-up to it at all, I remember then, and it all had that sense of being fairly routine, really, just a kind of reenactment of what happens every November when all the kind of leading teams come here and play in all the different venues around Europe. This is very, very, very different. As Ian again mentioned, as a resident myself of Brighton, my family was one of that almost 250,000 who tried to get tickets for the 2 games at the Amex, which were extraordinarily oversubscribed, you know, and there's already in very much a non-rugby city a great buzz about that. And apart from all the facts and figures that Ian has just mentioned, I think the key thing he mentioned there towards the end was being about a great host. You know, we can get a bit too wrapped up in important things that they are, the legacy and how many coaches we want and how many referees we want, and all that is very, very important. But that sense of fun, to me, is key. And I remember in Australia in 2003, actually everybody thought the Aussies, as the Aussies all would be incredibly sort of partisan, and there was a fair bit of pom bashing, I remember, when they're saying, is that all you've got? When they sort of a picture of Johnny Wilkinson. But they were actually fabulous hosts, and I think the 2003 World Cup really changed things from that 1999 experience, and that sense of coming together and enjoying the experience actually holistically worked. You know, everybody had a good time, and therefore the business also actually worked as well.
Can I just have a show of hands of those who applied for tickets online in the ballot? Yeah, that's fantastic. I actually applied myself, just so you're aware, and it's very transparent. I applied for 30 tickets. I was successful in 4. I got 4 tickets back, which I was chuffed to bits with. Italy v Ireland at the Olympic Stadium, which is obviously my 2 second teams. So it's, I think it just goes to show how popular the demand was, you know, for those tickets. Ian, I remember in 2003, having won the World Cup, we sort of came back here to, you know, having played the tournament in Australia, came back here, and obviously there was a big knock-on effect of that. I mean, everyone thought Johnny Wilkinson was still playing for England. In fact, the stadiums all around the country were sold out on the basis that they might get to see him, but even though it was announced that he was injured. I mean, obviously England is far better. We'll talk about the success of the national team in a minute, but the RFU in England are in a far better place now to capitalise on the hope, you know, the obvious and hopeful halo effect that Rugby World Cup will have for the 6-week period, aren't they?
Yeah, I mean, we hope so, and what I was trying to articulate was you need to plan for that. So it is the classic, and particularly with rugby. Yeah. If you haven't got the coaches, if you haven't got the volunteers, I mean, as you know well, probably most of you around here know as well, you know, mini rugby on a Sunday morning, you know, there are clubs that get 800, 1,000 children, and you need the coaches and you need the volunteers to help look after them. So if you're going to get an influx of that, you've got to be ready to try and deal with it as well. You've got to have something as basic as enough balls, enough changing rooms, enough facilities, all of the above. So I think what we're trying to do is plan for it. I mean, we hope almost that we still get demand almost exceeding that. But the other thing as well is it's got to be something sustainable, Lawrence. I think it's got to be something as well that there's occasional things you get boosts for a month or 2 months or 3 months. What we need to try and do is get that all the way through over a period of time, not just that immediate situation, and therefore plan for it. But that's what we're trying to do. And as I say, invest in it as well.
Mick, just talking about the success of England, I mean, clearly as hosts in any Rugby World Cup, in any sporting event, you know, doing well helps. You know, particularly in rugby, we saw in '87 the All Blacks won their own World Cup. In fact, they're good at winning them in their own country, actually. Yeah. They won it again in 2011. You know, Australia getting to the final in '03, France getting to the semi-final in 2007, and then, you know, none of us will forget the South Africans winning in 1995. I mean, I hate to be too cynical, but in terms of how this World Cup will be judged, and there are some fantastic plans, you know, been put in place by Ian and his team and the England 2015 team. There's no doubt that the mandate given down to that team was to organise an incredible tournament, and we're well on course to doing that. But will this tournament be judged on the success of the national team, and should it be, and is that fair? I mean, because I think I do remember in 2003, one of the things that we were most proud of is that we managed to take football off of every page, actually, and you know, create a sort of a pull-out of rugby, which was fantastic. And do you think it's fair that's the case?
I'm not sure whether it's fair or not. It probably isn't, but it will be how it, I'm afraid, a large chunk of it is judged. Initially anyway, obviously there'll be lots of long-term trickle-down effects, which are very important. And it really it was before actually Ian's time, I think, and certainly beyond his remit, is that the draw was made far too early. So that's how you've got this incredible group featuring...
Yeah, I thought as host nation we're supposed to have some advantage, but clearly we teed it up
that's
so that we're
that's
not.
the generous host. That's the thing, you see. And so England, Wales and Australia are all seeded, who I don't know what the current rankings are, there's something like 3, 4 and 6 maybe, but it was done almost 3 years before the event. In football, World Cup is done about 8 months before the thing, and it was just a freak combination of results. 3 days, I think, before the draw was made 3 years ago, I think Australia scored a length of the field try in the last minute against Wales when Wales were attacking down there, which actually knocked Wales down into the third band of seeds. So it is slightly unfair, but that's the way it is. I guess the flip of it is that first part of the tournament, the pool stages, which can be just a little bit kind of mundane and routine and the big guys go through eventually, actually will have an incredible kind of focus on England's group. So I hope it's inevitable that the floating voter will if England were Ian's nightmare every night, to go out in that pool stage, I'm afraid there will be a drop-off effect, because in rugby, the end of the tournament actually does extend out, because you've got to have a week's rest between matches, so knockout, semi-final, whereas in football it's much more concentrated at about every 4 days. So I don't think we'll eventually judge it by that, but I think there will be an initial judgment on that.
And do you think, just keeping on the theme of performance and the teams, do you think I know that everyone in the audience will probably want to ask a few questions around performance of the team, but certainly the last day of the Six Nations was a bit of a game changer, certainly for all of us. 9.5 million people watching, and I'm sure many of you in the audience as well. I was sort of cheering Wales in the morning, which was very strange for me, and they did brilliantly. And then cheering Scotland at lunchtime, which was even more strange. And then obviously cheering on England, in the final analysis. Do you think the way that rugby changed for that day in terms of the way they played, and from your own point of view, clearly I'm going to say that would care very passionately that England do well, and I think they will, because I think home advantage plays a huge part in any sport. But what do you think the chances are of some of the England and some of the home nations?
Well, I think that the schedule suits the Northern Hemisphere, as it should, because that is a benefit of being a host, in that obviously the Southern Hemisphere guys will be match hardened because they're now playing through their winter. However, with playing comes the possibility of injury, and all the kind of Northern Hemisphere teams have had their problems. England certainly have had over the last year. All those guys should be fit, barring the kind of occasional training accident or the warm-up games, and that's just what you've got to take. So they'll be in very good shape. I think all those contenders. I think England have taken it so far. I think Clive Woodward said, actually, didn't he, judge me on the World Cup, which
he meant
actually,
the next World Cup.
He said that in 1990, before 1999. I think England went out the quarter-final, but he meant the next World Cup. There is a slight element of that about this England side. There are a lot of young players, exciting young players like George Ford and Jonathan Joseph and Anthony Watson have just come through in this Six Nations. But sport is a very harsh judge, and you've got to play in the moment, haven't you? And I think those guys, as they showed in the Six Nations, certainly have potential. So I'd agree with you. Wales and Australia in your group, and let's not forget the opening night against Fiji, which certainly won't be a straightforward affair either. That the good thing is, if England get through that group, they'll be in very, very good shape. And if they get through that group as top seed, they'll be in very, very good shape. So yeah, I think there are few excuses in that sense. If Wales and Australia happen to be in your group, well, you're going to have to play them at some point, sides like that. Therefore, you've got to want and expect to beat them as the home side.
Ian, there's been a lot of huge amounts of preparation and planning in the lead up to this tournament, and I mean, as much as you can share with the audience in terms of Stuart's planning, he's obviously on the back of the Six Nations. He's got a pretty well planned and laid out schedule for the team now. I mean, he's one of the coaches that's benefiting from actually the season finishing in a month's time, so he really has time to work with the players. I mean, they really have it well mapped out between now and the start of the tournament.
Yeah, and I think it's been mapped out for some time. The training camps, how Stuart sees it, he's a very methodical manager as well as a coach. So, and I think what we've been trying to do very carefully is make sure that we bring in the top medical, strength and conditioning, performance people. There's a very interesting, I think it's been a helpful relationship between us and Premiership clubs lately, which has not always been perhaps full of sweetness and joy. Yeah. But I think at that level, because I think there's a good recognition and good support. So I think we've got all the people that are around it. I think we've tried to put in place the facilities that Stuart feels is necessary and try to give them as much support as possible. At the end of the day, when Mick comes back to it, these things are very small margins. I mean, you look at every game, even if you go back to the Six Nations, you know, could we have scored in the last minute against France? Did we not? How do these things work? Every game that I look, I have to say, when I used to dabble a bit in tennis, it was the same thing. You could look at a 5-set match and you could see a couple of points in the third set, and you knew that was a seminal moment. And I think that's true of rugby as well. So what I do know is that the margins are going to be pretty small, and that's why you've got to focus and concentrate on that. But I think the team are in as good a place as they can be. And I think that we've got, as Mick was saying, a really good build-up period. There's a good build-up period. If we get to the end of the season without any more significant injuries, then we've got a really quite lengthy period, some good warm-up games against France and Ireland, and I think we'll be in a really good place.
I'm inclined to agree. I think one of the key things that will come out is how England and the host nation in previous World Cups are able to cope with the pressure of playing in your own country, because clearly it's a different kind of pressure. You know, Mick and I and Ian were in New Zealand 4 years ago, and they were the outstanding side in the tournament, but yet they conspired to make life very difficult for themselves in the final because of the pressure of trying to win in your own country. So I think one of the challenges that Stuart's got is that can work in two ways. We've seen the French, they found it very difficult in 2007 and lost in the semi-final. Australia, you know, in 2003 used it to their advantage. So that's going to be quite interesting. I'm just conscious of time, and I want to give the audience the opportunity to ask questions on all the things that we've heard from Ian. Please feel free to ask questions to myself and to Mick as well. So if I could open it up to the floor now, I'll take any questions and put them to any of the panel. This gentleman at the front here.
Good morning. What has been the best World Cup to date, and why?
Well, Mick, you know, I was probably busy playing in them. Ian was busy in tennis, and you've been covering them for many years. So I'm going to put that one to you to start with. What's been the worst?
Socialised a bit in 2003. I don't think it was all playing, was it?
No,
but that was a good tournament. Right. But for me, this will be the 7th. I missed the first one in New Zealand and Australia, as it was in that very cobbled together sort of first tournament. But 95 has got special memories because it had a kind of context way beyond the sport, or came to have a context way beyond the sporting, you know, and that really just sort of touched different parts of your being in terms of politically, socially, culturally. It really was a sort of transformative kind of experience, really, and you know, the rugby itself was pretty good as well, and there were lots of, you know, it was Jonah Lomu's sort of first tournament as well, so, and obviously the whole sort of Rainbow Nation and the Mandela moment on the podium in '95. So that was, to me, that was certainly my most memorable kind of experience.
I certainly remember that it was the highlight for me was Nelson Mandela being introduced to the England team by Will Carling, and Dowie Morris, the scrum half, you know, wanting to ask him a question, and he grabbed Nelson Mandela's hand and he said, "Do you have Rotax out here in South Africa?" You know, it's not the sort of question you ask a couple of minutes before kick-off, but you know, he was. And obviously Nelson Mandela said, "I'm not sure, do we?" He said, "I'm not." But it was an incredible way of bringing the whole nation together and beating the All Blacks. Any other questions? Yes, gentleman at the front. Sorry, I'm making you walk to the front.
Thank you. Andy Hughes from The Grove. And first of all, thank you, because we've actually seen the benefits from corporate clients when the rugby club come in to come and stay with us. But sort of on a separate note, with a major organisation that's kind of said recently, Sporting yesterday said that they weren't really bothered about the future and some big events coming up. How do you work as an organisation balancing the business in sport and keeping your major sponsors, as you mentioned earlier, who are working really closely with you, because they want to see a win every game? I've never seen a rugby team go onto a pitch and go, "Well, we're not really bothered about winning over the next couple of weeks." You work quite closely with the coaches and the players. Because at the end of the day, the businesses that are sponsoring you guys, they want something back from that, and that's a passionate game, that's a big day, and I suppose for all of us here, you'd never want what was announced yesterday for what's coming up in the summer to someone to say it's not important to us.
Ian, I think that one sort of, yeah, I mean, clearly winning is important, but you can't necessarily guarantee it all the time.
No, and I think to be fair to most sponsors, I go back to 2011 after that, and I mean, I started after that. Many of our sponsors actually stayed with the RFU, and they did, and we were grateful for that. I think they wanted to see what was going on and what was happening, and I think most of the time as well, it's about integration. My mantra very much is there should be one RFU all the way through, so it should be indistinguishable, and that should be clear to the sponsors as well. So from Chris Robshaw to somebody who is playing mini rugby on a Sunday morning, we want to see one RFU. We want to see a connection. We want to see the England coaches going to the community game, and they've had various competitions recently, so Mike Catt, Andy Farrell, Stuart will go and do that sort of thing. They want to see a connection with the sponsors, and I think most sponsors want to see that community activation as well. So it is interesting. I was listening very carefully to Seb about business and in sport. You know, rugby only went professional in the 1990s. And it has not been professional for a long time. And there's still that balance between how do you have an encouragement of 70, 80, 100,000 volunteers who day in, day out make rugby work in their clubs, and the professional end of the game. And how do you run that as a competitive business? And the point going back to it, there's always that thing about are you too commercial? I never quite get that, because I think it's hugely important with the commercial sponsors and what they can do. And I think I gave some examples about it in the activation campaign, and all of them, I have to say, do that. And all of them are committed to rugby. But equally, the money that comes in, whether it's television or that as well, everything goes back into the game. So we can't do investment into clubhouses, coaches, referees, unless we get all of that. And so therefore I think it's very important that we're professional with the game, and professional in terms of the way we manage it, but always recognise that you still can't do it without volunteers on a morning in a clubhouse. That is extremely important. I think that's what we try and do.
And could I just ask you, I mean, when Stuart was at Lancaster was appointed end of 2011, interim for that first part of 2012, I think, was that kind of whole approach that he adopted and as you say, is enacting in terms of reconnecting with sponsors and that whole kind of business part of it? I would imagine primarily, I would hope, and it's certainly borne out, that him as a coach was by far the most important criteria, but I think probably looking at the way the job has evolved, that ability to actually see the business as opposed to just the sport was an important part of his appointment. Is that true?
I think it was. I think we certainly wanted an integrated person. You can do some of these things either way. You can have a situation where there's an isolated view that we put things in a bubble and we do it at that end, or you can have it's a wholly integrated thing. I mean, so you're absolutely right. The priority, let's be clear, was Stuart as a coach, and how did that work, and was he the best coach that we could find? But certainly philosophically, I think it's very helpful and very important that we've been, if you like, on a similar page as to what we think and what we should be doing. And Stuart and the coaching team, to be fair, get their broader commitment to rugby. They get that they have to deliver, of course. And as you said, look, we all get it. We're going to have to be judged on how do we get on, do we win, do we not win. But crumbs, it's so much more important if you feel that there is key values, that you feel that there are principles you're going to try and deal with, if you feel that you get a culture of engagement. You know, and the fact that Stuart's I still makes me laugh that he's the assistant head coach of I think he's now got to the under-13s. He started off at the under-12s in Leeds, and he's not even made it to the head coach yet. But that he still does that, and I think it's very important. And I think going back to galvanising and engaging people, and it's just interesting. One of my slightly favourite examples, and we all do. How do we contrive social media moments to make things work? And frankly, contrived ones never work. My favourite recently at one of the internationals was this little 6-year-old boy standing in front of Chris Robshaw singing the national anthem. And if there was a picture, if you like, that conveyed a lot of things, and it was not contrived, it was totally there. There was Harry, now with his agent, I gather, singing, now with his agent, he didn't have him at the time, obviously, singing the national anthem and belting it out, standing in front of Chris Robshaw. So if you want that form of connection, and what we should really be about, we're about growing the game, and if you want to grow the game, you need to connect. So it's about the winning, but you need to have that connection, and the sponsors are a crucial help and aid into that as well as everything else.
Yeah, I mean, here, I think as in defence of Stuart Lancaster, I think he inherited an England team, and he spent the first couple of years, or certainly the first 18 months, reconnecting the players with their responsibilities of what it meant to play for England, and that's not something the England coach, when he takes over, should really have to do. And I, do sympathise in the sense that trying to relocate the moral compass of the team and the identity of the team has with the nation was the first criteria of his job. And then actually once he did that and achieved that, which took about 18 months, he was then able to focus on performance, and we're starting to see the benefits reaped of that. And I think one of the legacies of any World Cup is how we pass on to the next person, whether that's Stuart, whether that's someone else, is making sure that they take the team over in a far better position than how they left it. And I do believe that whatever happens in the World Cup, whatever happens beyond the World Cup, England are in a very strong place because it's much more connected and aligned to the business of rugby than it ever was before. A few more questions, please, from the audience. Giles, just wait for you to get the microphone.
Hi, Giles Morgan from HSBC. Question for all the panel. I understand the accessibility that many sports need to try and drive and to open the game up for England. And I also know the business model with World Rugby, but is there a concern about ticket prices? I know that the subscription's been fantastic, but it is a very expensive way to spend a Saturday or Sunday afternoon, and you're not the only sport to do so. And is that something that you've thought long and hard about, I suppose, particularly to you, Ian?
Ticket prices and the model of rugby, I suppose, Ian, to a certain degree, the Rugby World Cup has existed in a certain way for the last 7. Doesn't mean England had to follow that model. And in actual fact, we've actually broken the model because we've tried to offer tickets to every individual as opposed to batching tickets together and saying if you buy them for this game, you get them for that game. And I think it is a slightly different model this time around.
I think it's always a matter of balance. I mean, it's a matter of fact. We had to put a guarantee in to get the gig in the first place, if you like, which certainly going back to Sleepless Nights, and it was £80 million. I mean, it's well known. So pretty much against the ticket revenue. So you have to deal with some of that. I think what you have to do as well, and what we're trying to do when we've got multiple venues as well, is there's always a great focus on, of course, the ticket prices at Twickenham at the end of the tournament are high. Doesn't seem to have put people off applying, but you've got to recognise that they are high. Whereas actually there's plenty of £20 tickets, there's plenty of tickets at other prices around the country and around those sort of games as well. So you've got to try and find that balance. I think broadening it slightly as well, and I think we've achieved that. I think as well ticket pricing generally at Twickenham is kept pretty low by comparison to other major sporting events at the time, and because we're very conscious of keeping, a lot of our people who come to Twickenham are from rugby clubs. We're made very clear by them that they want the fan to come. We want families to come and all of that as well. So I think that ticket pricing generally is reasonable, but I do take the point about the higher level of prices, but it's trying to find that balance. But there's been plenty of tickets at a lesser price and plenty of ticket opportunities for families and for children as well to come. And also, I mean, there's certain people who would feel that the Rugby World Cup would be better served having more traditional rugby stadiums hosting the games. I mean, Exeter and Gloucester and one or two others are hosting, but what the model has tried to do is actually take rugby out of its comfort zone and into traditional football heartlands and football stadiums, and it wouldn't have been possible without collaboration from the Premier League and other people, but actually to try and offer as many people tickets by putting games in much bigger stadiums this time around, and so far so good. But I mean there is quite a discrepancy in the ticket pricing. Question there from the middle of the room, if I may.
Thank you. Richard Moore from Capitalise. I'm interested in your views on and what the business of rugby can learn from the Kevin Peterson saga.
It's Shall I take that one on for starters? I think culture is really important in a team. I think people underestimate the, how important that is, particularly in a team sport like cricket, where these guys are spending a huge amount of time with each other. I think trusting each other is very important. And I know that from my own experience of working both at club level at WOS and with England, we spent an enormous amount of time putting together a culture and some certain values and certain ways of behaving, a modus operandi for how the team behaved, both together, both when we were together and outside of that team environment. And it was something that every coach I've ever worked with in my sport certainly put a huge bearing on. I think Stuart, when he took over the England team, was very clear that, listen, everyone makes mistakes. We all have done, some very, very public. And I'm willing to give certain players the benefit of the doubt, but be very clear, this is the culture and environment that you're getting involved in. And, once you do cross the line, there's no return. I think Stuart was very clear with certain players, and he singled them out, like Danny Kerr and one or two others. And I think now he has a very strong culture and a very, very strong team ethos. So much so that they're now sort of questioning whether bringing players in from overseas would disrupt that. And that's a big talking point in rugby. So, I wasn't surprised to hear the comments that were made yesterday around Peterson. It's a great shame because he's been a fantastic cricket player, still is, and scoring lots of runs. But I think the team should come before the individual. I really do, and I think the values and culture of that team are really important. And if English cricket don't feel that they can cope with Kevin Peterson, then that's the decision they've made. There'll be people that disagree with it in the room. There'll be people that disagree with it outside the room. But that's where we are. Until that decision changes, he looks like he's going to be playing IPL.
I'd say from media point of view, I'd say from the outside looking in, I'd say it was very poorly handled in terms of the mixed messages that have come out along the way. And my colleague Jonathan Liu in the Telegraph this morning said if you're taking on the Kevin Peterson publicity machine, it's a bit like playing Twister with an octopus. You're just going to lose no matter which way you go. You're not going to come out well. But I do think from a media point of view, it was it didn't come out well. It wasn't handled well. Even in the final moment, it may have been a legal thing. If you're saying it's based on trust issues, I do think you've actually got to articulate pretty clearly within legal parameters, maybe of exactly what they are, so that the public can actually hear it, and then you move on. Decision made. It's
very, very interesting when we were putting together the culture, how we would work together as an England team. The subject of whether current players, should be writing newspaper columns, was heavily talked about. And Clive Woodward said, "Well, I think absolutely not." I said, "Well, not everyone earns what you earn, Clive. So some of these guys actually might want to supplement their income and actually might have an opinion or two to articulate in the national press." So I think we came to a common consensus that we wouldn't. We were very happy for players to write their columns, and we still want them to be interesting and not sterile pieces of verbatim that have no interest to the readers. But you cannot be criticising your fellow teammates and opponents, for that matter, very publicly whilst you're still in the team. And so I think there is a level of trust that's obviously been breached there. And as I said, it's a great shame. But I agree with Mick, it's not been handled brilliantly on either side. But then again, there's new people involved in the ECB now. Both Tom Harrison, who's running the game as the CEO, and Andrew Strauss, and they've got the courage of their convictions to make a decision and stick with it.
Ian, can I ask you, put you on the spot? One of the kind of the lips of one of the fires, the many fires around Kevin Peterson, was the comment of Colin Graves coming in as the new. I think he only starts his job on Friday. He made a comment which seemingly appeared to open the door to Peterson, and that led on that. Do you see you're heading up an organised sporting organisation whether you should just keep away from the sporting matters entirely? I'd say that's almost impossible. But how do you see that, your kind of role in those matters, to make comment on sport?
Well, as you know well, Mick Sigg on my right asked me a question at a press conference briefing not that long ago when he said to me, did I find coming second in the Four Nations, in the Six Nations 4 years running, acceptable? And I suppose I rather looked at it, if you said to Lawrence, if I went to any of the England team and you said, do you find coming second acceptable? They all want to win. We don't always win, and it's very difficult to win. But I think you've got to start from a presumption that you want to win, and therefore you're focused on winning. And I think there's 2 points. I think if you're the chief executive of an organisation, then you should be able to make comment on all aspects of it. I think the other thing is, again, in common with most organisations, it's always important to have a coherent message as well. So that's what we try and do. But I think you've got to recognise, I mean, you know, Lawrence or elsewhere, I'm very conscious, first time when I met the England squad, they all know, it's hardly surprising, I am not a player, have not been a player, I'm not somebody who was dyed in the wool in terms of with rugby, but what you have to do, I think, is to understand it, have a passion for it, have a commitment for it, appreciate what you're trying to do. And one of the interesting things we had as a management team, just going back to the management culture, I think culture is extremely important, and I'm sure most of you in your organisations are the same. And certainly when I started at the RFU, we spent a lot of time, as did Stuart in his area, talking about the culture, what were we going to do, how are we going to do things, how are we going to work together as a team. And of course the other thing, as far as, and Lawrence is a classic example, I'm certainly not going to talk about other sports, but as far as rugby's concerned, you are literally putting your body on the line occasionally for your mates in the team. So rugby is a huge team sport. You can't have a situation where there's anything other than total trust in each other and an understanding and a working together. That doesn't mean to say, and I'm sure he'll talk about it much more eloquently and knowledgeably than I can, doesn't mean to say that everybody gets on all the time, doesn't mean to say that everybody loves each other dearly, but there's got to be an acceptance of working together in a team environment that I think is very important, and I'm sure that's very important in 2003 and is very important now with Stuart.
Yeah, absolutely, and no harm in the CEO putting a little bit of pressure on the director of rugby either, to be honest. You know, criticism, you know, good and bad, is what you receive in sport, and you know, we're all grown up to know that if you come second or you lose, it's not acceptable, both externally or internally. So, you know, I'm sure that any comments made would only motivate you know, the head coach and the players as well. I think, Jim, we've got time for a few more questions, haven't we? We take one from just the side there, just where the microphone is. That'd be nice and quick then, won't it?
Hi, Ben Rumsby from the Telegraph. We've been speaking about how important it is that England do as well as possible this year. Will we see the overseas players in the team? Maybe this is a question more for Ian. Has that decision already been made by Stuart? What's your personal take on this issue, and what factors do you think are involved in a decision like this?
Well, understand the question, Ben. Hardly surprisingly, I'm not going to answer it. You know, because it wouldn't be appropriate for me to say anything. So, you know, I think there's a multitude of things you look at. That's all I would say, and we're looking at it on a coherent and collaborative basis within the union.
All I can tell you, right, from my point of view, is someone who's played international rugby for 13 years. The pressure's on you playing in this country to get yourself in shape, keep yourself in shape. All the travelling that's required to and from every England training session now is enormous. I don't honestly believe the best place for an English international rugby player is down in the south of France. I really don't. The players who went there because they weren't good enough to get in the England team. They're now playing at a level of rugby that perhaps is good enough. That depends what side of the you know, you sit on that basis. But I think, you know, it's very clear. We're trying to grow the game in this country. The World Cup is evidence of that. I truly believe the best rugby players in this country should play in this country. If you're a sponsor, and there are many in the room, and you're putting vast amounts of money into the English game, you do not want the players moving overseas and playing, you know, for French clubs. It's as simple as that. And there is an ownership issue of the player, control of the player. You know, when he signs for a French club at the moment, the French RFU do not have the same long-form agreement in place with the RFU. The French clubs, rather, don't have the same relationship with the RFU, quite obviously, as the English clubs do. So all sorts of issues like player release. I mean, the French Championship doesn't finish until, you know, the end of June or something. So there's all sorts of reasons why it becomes very, very difficult. And I'm sure, you know, if a player really wants to play for England, you know, and Stefan Armitage being the person, you know, I'm sure if he went to the owner of Toulon and said, look, I'm really passionate about playing for England, would you mind if you release me from my contract? I'd like to go and join Bath or Northampton or Wasps or Harlequins or any of those clubs. I'm sure he would do that because he's a man who understands that well, he's driven by passion, whether it's for his club or for his country. So I think the rules are very simple, very clear. I think they are the right rules, and I don't think they should be broken. So I'll answer that question.
Mike Thompson from City Football Group. Obviously, the role of the Rugby World Cup from a World Rugby perspective is the major revenue driver to fund development for the international game. Obviously, hosting it in the UK means it probably generates more money that you can reinvest than holding in other countries. So if you're World Rugby moving forward and you have the option to come back to an established market like the UK or go to South America or Russia or the States, how do you balance those priorities?
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? Because clearly we're delighted to have the Rugby World Cup here. I guess, Brett Gosper's not here to speak on behalf of World Rugby, but there's a bit of balancing in terms of the commercial model, and I think they've principally stuck to a model of Southern Hemisphere for one World Cup and then Northern Hemisphere. The next World Cup, I'm sure everyone will realise, is in Japan in 2019, and then I believe the bidding process starts in earnest for the World Cup after that. And interestingly, the options will be South Africa, Ireland possibly, and Italy, which and obviously with a Northern Hemisphere hat on, both Italy and Ireland would host brilliant World Cups for lots of reasons, not just to do with rugby. So I'm sure.
Stepping outside that traditional constituency, it would be a risk. There's no question. It's a question of when they think it's the right time to take a risk. Japan is a risk. There was a strong lobby for Japan to host the 2011 Rugby World Cup, and instead it went to New Zealand because they felt, and I agreed with it as well, that a country that is without doubt the dominant rugby force of all time, certainly over the last several decades, should have that right to host a World Cup. And it was hosted, I'm pretty certain, with the knowledge that it would never be hosted there again, simply because of those economic imperatives that we've just spoken about. Quite how far and quite when you extend the market, I think Japan will be a very interesting sort of testing ground in terms of some of those criteria for evaluating it, which you've just mentioned, in terms of that inclusivity and the hosting and the getting on board, everybody behind it. Whether that will work in Japan or not, we'll wait and see. So there are economic imperatives there. I'd like to see extend that. I'd love to see it in Argentina or South America, or one of the South American countries, Argentina being the obvious example of a great rugby playing nation.
I think bear in mind this is the first time that England has actually hosted the World Cup on its own, and although there are 8 or 9 games at the Millennium Stadium, so I think it is balancing the desire for World Rugby to grow the game, and clearly there are territories that we would like to take the game into, but also trying to balance that with the commercial model, because Brett Gosper is under increasing pressure to fund the game globally, especially some of the tier 2, tier 3 nations that really need investment to develop their rugby. Couple more questions. Take one from the front there, please.
Thank you. Simon Long from Replicom. It's a question for you, Ian, if I may. I'm a lifelong rugby fan, parent, follower, and yet I still find the rules of the game mystifying. And I wonder, in terms of connecting and growing the game, whether you've done any research into the barriers, and indeed how, with your media partners or sponsors, you might wish to address that.
I think it's very important that there's going to be... It's also trying to find a balance of not irritating people who already know some of the finer points. I'd certainly bow some of the black arts of what happens in certain areas in the scrum and the ruck, I think is always a bit interesting. So I always, of course, listen to Brian Moore and what he says on that. But I think it's a difficult area. What we're going to do with the World Cup is there are going to be some videos, there are going to be some digital activation about here's the rules of the game, because again, we are hoping that there's a load of people who are going to come who maybe never been to a rugby match before. Some of the venues, I think, is helpful in that regard. So I think we've got to make sure that the rules are explained and understandable. So there will be here's a simple explanation of what happens at a scrum, at a line out, at a ruck, on a maul, etc. So that will happen, I think, around the World Cup. We do spend a lot of time looking at rule changes. Sometimes these things are very difficult to do, and this is again a matter as much for World Rugby as to how do you do it, because you've got to do it on that sort of basis as to what makes the game look attractive, what makes the game look pleasing and makes it flow. It's quite interesting sometimes. The other point I would probably make is the rules didn't seem to cause a huge problem on the last day of the Six Nations. I didn't see anybody saying then that the rules were preventing what happened. There are other things and other reasons, and there are all sorts of reasons for why everybody played like that. But I think the short answer to your question is, both in the World Cup, I think we'll try and deal with it that way, in terms of generally there is a lot of work put in by groups to look at the rules to try and make them more understandable and simpler, and to try and make the game even more free-flowing than perhaps it is.
I would agree with that, and I think one of the challenges that all sports have, not just rugby, around driving participation is how we communicate the finer points of the game, or the game itself, to maybe 16 to 24-year-olds particularly. And I think that the way that we are communicating with that generation is changing all the time. And I think clearly when
it's a fine line though, isn't it? Because you demystify it too much, and you end up with something that's not the original sport, such as the T20 Test cricket kind of. Where do you stand on that spectrum as well? So you've got to be careful. It's not an easy thing to hit that kind of fine line point, really, is it? Between patronising people and actually doing that. I mean, I enjoy kind of a driving ball and a slow moving. I mean, Exeter beat Saracens last week with 3 tries. I think the combined range of them was about 4 metres, that they were scored from, and it was a fantastic game. So, it doesn't all have to be about wonderful, easy on the eye, simple running from the thing. There are lots of nuances, as you know, and that's part of the appeal of the sport.
I think we'll take one more question, if we may, from the front row.
Hi, this is a question again for Ian. I'm Sophie Morris from Mill Harbour Marketing. I'm a fan, a player and a volunteer in rugby. I sit on one of your regional legacy groups, in fact. Is Twickenham on track to be a connected stadium for the World Cup? Bearing in mind the delivery of some of these aspects to people at the game in terms of their enjoyment and understanding, and how they could help promote that to people not at the games could help benefit the UK generally.
Yes, is the short answer. Part of the investment that we've put in, sometimes with all concrete stadiums, inside some elements of the stadium, Wi-Fi connection and how does it work. But we've spent £76 million on the stadium over the last 2 or 3 years to upgrade it, particularly for the World Cup. Anything from the pitch to the turnstiles to the Wi-Fi. And to the sort of general infrastructure. So I think we recognise the importance of that connectivity, and as you would appreciate well, how you then connect with the fans when they come. And certainly one of the things that we looked at a lot within the RFU is how do we connect with 2,000 member clubs, all the people who are in there, how do we know where they are, what they want to do, how we can talk to them, ditto for people that come to the stadium. And it's not something that we've done before, but we've invested in a major CRM system as well in partnership with IBM in order to make sure that we can have that sort of connectivity. And again, the connectivity is for a whole number of reasons, making them feel they've got a great visit to the stadium, and we still need to work on that. Of course we do. I'm not saying, far from saying it's perfect, but I think we've got to make it a better experience. And then how do you connect with the fans and with the people who are in the game much more better than we have been doing? And I think we're in a place to do that now with the technology.
Yeah, I agree. I think having been over to the States, I think one of the things that I was amazed by is how the TV screens around the stadium connect with, in terms of the content of what they're delivering during the game. I mean, clearly they have lots of breaks, so it's a lot easier, but certainly with the fans in the stadium. So, lots of things to consider there. We could go on for a lot longer. I'm going to draw this to a conclusion. Can I thank the Telegraph and BT Sport for bringing us together? Thank you, Jim. And can we give a round of applause to our panel, please? Thank you.